I just came across this book, Safeguarding Autistic Girls, Strategies for Professionals by Carly Jones.
In this book around safeguarding, which I would urge any of you who are at all interested in safeguarding, particularly women and girls, but actually, as the book says, it applies to every person.
Safeguarding Autistic Girls, Strategies for Professionals by Carly Jones and Luke Beardon, who wrote the foreword. This honest, to-the-point guide illuminates the experience of young autistic girls and explores the situation they can easily fall victim to. Powerful case studies show how easily misunderstandings can arise for autistic girls and help the reader to identify common patterns of abuse, providing professionals with access to safeguarding strategies that are straightforward to implement and highly effective. This is essential reading for everyone who wants to better understand the challenges faced by this vulnerable group and ensure they have access to the same opportunities to secure a good education and build safe and happy relationships as their peers. Foreword by Luke Beardon. It used to be the case that the world's population could be split into two, those fortunate enough to know Carly Jones, MBE, and those unfortunates who had yet to have that absolute pleasure. I'm one of the lucky ones, by the way. Now, however, there is a third option, to get to know Carly via the fabulous narrative that is an essential read. I was going to write an essential read for and end the sentence with something along the lines of anyone interested in autism, blah blah blah. Sense took over, though. This book is literally an essential read for everyone. If I had my way, it would be statutory reading within education without exception. Why? Because it is a life-changing book. It might not change the lives of everyone who reads it, but the potential for it to be life-changing to many is evident as one reads through the book. Its importance cannot be underestimated. I was worried about reading this. Well, firstly, I was delighted that Carly had asked me in the first place, but the nature of the subject is not something that filled me with joy. I was anxious, to put it mildly, that I would struggle emotionally and be left feeling way worse about the world than before I started. And yet it seems that Carly has done the nigh on impossible. She has written about horrendous situations in a way that is hard-hitting. Emotional roller coaster is as apt a phrase as can be in reference to reading this book, and yet alleviates the potential for negativity with such a sublime narrative style, with such gentleness and sensitivity, with such wry humor, that the words never become overwhelming. Carly has an extraordinary presence in real life, and she has managed to imbue her book with the essence of Carly in such a way that on reading I never felt alone. She remained a comforting companion throughout, which I suspect will be vital for many of the vulnerable people who are yet to read this publication. The book itself is so full of wisdom, has so many gems of useful, pertinent suggestions and information, and covers such a vast array of beneficial areas of life that On finishing it, I was drawn back to page 1 to read it again. Then once more to make it 3. All of this was in one sitting. By the way, Carly's style is so accessible that reading is not an effort or a chore, but a delight. Even taking the difficult nature of what she is writing about into account. Don't be put off by thinking that this is all about autistic girls, women. This book is of relevance to autistic boys, men too. Many of the examples given could easily be understood in different contexts. It is devastating that the book is necessary, that the abuse of autistic people is so prevalent, that autistic people have to suffer to such a degree. Challenging preconceptions. If you don't believe autistic folk have a sense of humor or empathy, prepare to be challenged. In all sorts of ways, though, this book reaches beyond abuse and vulnerability and has a positivity throughout that is heartwarming and uplifting. Carly writes, I don't want to use up all your time and the entire book's word count on various accounts of my life story, as it feels self-indulgent. We would be here for weeks, and I don't want to bore you to tears. My response, bring on the next book, Carly Jones. Dr. Luke Beardon.
I know you told me not to say anything, but I'm going to say something. So you're an autism advocate, keynote speaker, presenter, author. You've also been involved in quite a lot of UK policy work around safeguarding. You've also, if people haven't heard of the Oliver McGowan training, then again, I urge you to look into that. And Carly's been spearheading a lot of that. And you received the accolade of an MBE for your pioneering work around diagnosis, education and safeguarding of autistic women, girls and their families.
I'm not going to lie to you and sell this book as one that critics would describe as hard to put down. Quite the contrary. It's going to be a book that's hard to pick up. It was a hard book to write, and after a year of typing away at the laptop and taking mental breaks to process the upheaval of emotions it brought to the surface, I'll be candid with you. I never wanted to lay eyes on it again. It's more likely to be the book that you'll reach for when someone you support has found life's rock bottom and you need jargon-free, honest, tried and tested strategies fast. It's not going to be easy to digest either, as you will be from the point this introduction ends walking in the shoes of some of the most heartbreaking cases, patterns of abuse and misunderstandings faced by autistic girls, with an aim to make sure together we break the cycle. Autistic girls are never more vulnerable than when their vulnerabilities are not known by those who care for them. There is a risk to that too, of course. By writing a book demonstrating the loopholes found when safeguarding autistic girls, could it be used in the wrong hands as a manual on how to exploit them? That fear is behind every word I typed. I wanted to write an extensive book about safeguarding many years ago and reasoned myself out of it thanks to the fears mentioned above. So why now? Well, first, because the lovely Linda and team at Jessica Kingsley Publishers emailed and asked me to write it. But logistics aside, right now is actually for so many not fast enough at all. Although diagnosis of autistic girls has thankfully skyrocketed in the last 10+ years. When it comes to their safeguarding, not much is changing. It is time to skyrocket autistic girls' safety too. The patterns of abuse and mistreatment of autistic girls that we saw in the 80s and 90s are still as routine today. Day in, day out, my office, emails and social media inboxes are full of requests for strategies to help yet another autistic girl in a vulnerable situation that keeps happening to them like clockwork, day by day, month by month, year by year. It's a race against time for them all in a timeless, systematic flowchart. Autistic girls' vulnerabilities have been seen in generation after generation. The same journeys without understanding, support, and strategies are mapped out in the most heart-wrenchingly predictable patterns. I have a particular loathing for anyone who describes themselves as an expert. If other people call someone an expert, that's kind and often true, but to sell yourself as an expert is a bit like those blokes who introduce themselves as the most attractive man in the room at a party. It is not only grossly narcissistic, yes, it's also subjective to the person looking at you. What lies beneath the veneer depends on who else is in the room, and, anyway, it is ultimately an accolade that only lasts so long. Advocacy is the same. You may be in a room where you are the most experienced in that subject matter. Change the subject matter or change the room, and the expert label is gone. I do not like to advertise myself as an expert or an academic. I am autistic, diagnosed at 32 after a life of vast vulnerability, near misses, misunderstandings, and upheaval. I left school at 15, pregnant, and ended up living in a mother and baby hostel. My qualifications gained whilst living in that hostel were A-level equivalents from an apprentice in a legal office and Open University Social Sciences in my early 20s. I don't have a degree though. I failed it. I ran out of money when I got divorced at 25. My creditability is solely that of duty and dedication, albeit not to a doctorate. I know what I know from experience, and I am happy to share that alongside my professional advocacy insights and years of loophole spotting experience. It is not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but if it helps one person, who then helps another and another, it will be worth it. Chapter 1. The current situation. Why are autistic girls vulnerable? Autistic girls' biggest vulnerability is that they are often hidden in plain sight. If we don't know that an autistic girl is autistic to start with, we cannot support her to become less vulnerable. And even if she does have a known diagnosis of autism, if we do not know the specific risk that autistic girls face, how can we mitigate against those risks? For example, many autistic people experience prosopagnosia, often spoken about in layman's terms as face blindness. It means having difficulty recognizing people's faces well. Many autistic people with prosopagnosia are not able to immediately recognize their friends, family members, teachers, etc., especially out of context, seeing them in a place where they would not expect to see them. Oh yeah, then you just don't recognize those people. You may find friends of autistic girls have a very distinctive accent, hairstyle or color, and style of dressing. It's possible that the autistic girl feels more comfortable with them as they recognize them better. I don't think this is often a conscious choice, but as humans we tend to be drawn to those we feel comfortable with and are happy to see, so naturally recognizing someone is a good start. Autistic girls all too often get left behind. The reasons for this are wide and varied. In 2015, I undertook an informal survey to explore this in more detail. This is a method I use a lot to ensure I'm not just basing my thinking on my own perspective. The research showed that 91% of autistic adults had experienced some form of abuse before their autism diagnosis. The same informal survey research, however, also showed that after diagnosis, support and building self-awareness, up to 73% of autistic adults questioned have been safer, either as they had not experienced abuse or had the self-awareness to spot abuse, prevent it, or report it in a timely fashion. Autistic girls growing up are likely to have difficulty navigating the social aspect of boundaries, as very often they are already out of their comfort zone when with friends and peers. This can often mean they go into remote control mode and passively follow the group in order to manage and keep up. As you may be aware, many autistic girls struggle with social imagination. In short, this can mean foreseeing what is consequential in social contexts. In slightly longer form, it can mean being able to look at social situations and interpret what could happen for each of the people involved in a social situation. A social situation, of course, is not always a big event, social gathering or a party. A phone call, group, text message, and a table of friends and peers at university or school is a social situation. It is important professionals know autistic girls' differences in order to have the tools to understand and safeguard them as much as they can. There are more hurdles in doing so, I'm afraid, but it's better to be honest in discussing these differences in order to manage them and make life less dangerous in the long term. The double empathy problem, or DEP, amplified by the work of Dr. Damien Milton, who has undertaken research into the double empathy problem, demonstrates that issues in communication between autistic and non-autistic individuals are not the fault of autistic people alone, but rather are a breakdown of mutual understanding between humans who experience and view the world differently.
That you recommend to help with demasking?
So Helen Ellis and Felicity Sedgwick have a book called what's it called? It's if you put in Helen Ellis masking book, really good book on masking. and that's on Amazon. I can't remember the full title of it now. It's probably Autism and Masking.
So of course I had to look it up, since I'm a passionate reader. Autism and masking, how and why people do it and the impact it can have. Autistic people often feel they have to present as neurotypical or perform neurotypical social behaviors in order to fit in. So-called masking is a social survival strategy used by autistic people in situations where neurodiversity is not understood or welcomed. While this is a commonly observed phenomenon in the autistic community, the complexities of masking are still not widely understood. This book combines the latest research with personal case studies detailing autistic experiences of masking. It explains what masking is and the various strategies used to mask in social situations. The research also delves into the psychology behind masking and the specifics of masking at school, at social events with peers, and at work. The book looks at the consequences of masking, including the toll it can have on mental and physical health, and suggests guidance for family, professionals, and employers to ameliorate negative effects.